Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast. NFL Week 10, we have officially passed the midway point in the professional football season. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. How you doing this fine Thursday, my friend?
Thank God. Past the halfway mark. Here we are.
It has truly
NFL season.
It has truly been a grind. There will be no Trevor Siemian call-ups for the Jets, nor on this fine podcast. Unfortunately, you're looking at the starting quarterback duo for Bet the Board. But the games this weekend, let me tell you, not a lot of intrigue when we went through and tried to identify 5 that we had to break down here. So this should be a show that we're in and out in about, 18 minutes?
That'd be nice. Probably unlikely. But you and I were chatting off air here about what's going on in the market in the NFL, and it's just been a very weird season. Lots of battles among pros, not seeing things the same way. It's caused a lot of interesting things unfolding in the market. Just, again, last week you have 9 new starting quarterbacks, 7 are rookies. It just creates weird data points that you can use moving forward. So been a very interesting NFL season, to say the least, coupled with drastic drops in point scoring, and so you're kind of playing the game of, is the floor in and we're going to start pummeling some overs, or is there not going to be any material change to warrant that, and we're going to continue seeing lower scoring? I believe we had more unders again last week, even though point totals substantially lower than they were a season ago. Now on the cusp of reaching 5 points lower than they were a year ago.
I mean, I think Brad sent out a tweet. He said if you played every under blindly, you'd be hitting at a 62% clip. I mean, if we didn't do anything but just walk to the window, going to go, I'd like all 16 games on the NFL slate under the total. It'd have a hell of a lot more free time this fall. But of course, you said when we start to reach the bottom, now we get into the time of year where weather can play a bigger role. So let's add another variable into the equation to make this process even that much more challenging. But speaking of challenging processes, I think it'll be challenging for the viewer to stay tuned for tonight's Thursday night football game for 4 full quarters between the Bears and the Panthers that continue to do battle towards the top of the draft. The interesting subplot in this game is that the Bears benefit immensely by beating Carolina and keeping their foot on the neck of the Panthers, knowing that they will have their first-round draft pick. When we look at the side in total in this contest, we've seen the Bears move from 4-point favorites. Justin Fields gets ruled out. We're now looking at 3 flat across the market, even a prominent shop trending towards a softer 3. Total in the game has dipped from 40 at the peak down to 38.5. And when we look at the Carolina Panthers, Payne, they have not exactly been what I would call road warriors by any stretch of the imagination, losing each contest away from Charlotte by double digits at the Falcons, at the Seahawks, at the Dolphins, at the Lions. It's actually the longest streak of double-digit losses in franchise history. And when we look at what this team has done, 36.3 points per game allowed on the road this season. Not exactly something to leave you warm and tingly. And for a Panthers team that didn't have much to be excited about, the defense even more beat up, with Brian Burns and C.J. Henderson both expected to miss with concussions suffered versus Indy. We can say what we want about Bryce Young. We talked about him a little bit on Monday and some of the challenges that he has had adapting to life in the NFL, but you have a rookie quarterback on the other side in Tyson Bagent, who will make his start. 6 turnovers in his past 2 games, including 4 last week in the 7-point loss against the New Orleans Saints. Of course, the Saints do what they've always done when DJ Moore was a member of the Panthers, completely clamped down on him, and you saw him removed from the game plan. If you're looking at one storyline or matchup to follow in this contest, where do you think there's an edge to be found, either for the Bears offense against the Panthers defense or for Bryce Young to maybe break out, albeit against a Bears defense that, as they're getting healthier, is trending in the right direction, especially with the addition of a very talented member on the defensive line?
Well, I think the first thing you said at the absolute top was the price on this game. That, to me, is your starting point for any handicap. And once the market got to Carolina +4, very large buy. And then again, even this morning at 3.5, it just, you start to think about it, right? Like Chicago can cover numbers like they did last week as a 10-point dog, but now you're asking them to kind of flip the favorite role and cover by margin. So it's a completely different task. We talked a little bit off air. Now that we are at 3 and potentially, trending a touch lower to a more affordable money line, I start to kind of ask myself what Carolina's doing offensively in this spot.
The answer is probably not much.
Yeah. I mean, we think about the Panthers. They went into their bye, and all of a sudden they were going to come out with a bunch of changes. Frank Reich was handing over the play calling duties to Thomas Brown. I try to stay off social media, but even me going there maybe once a day, it became, you would have thought fucking Thomas Brown was Kyle Shanahan. I mean, he was going to change the world. And so all of a sudden, like, the Panthers played 2 defenses post-bye that were by no means great, right? The Colts were banged up. And then, you kind of just look at their numbers. It generated a non-garbage time success rate of 35% and a negative 0.28 EPA per play the last 2 weeks with Thomas Brown. Like, if you can't change things during the bye, what are you possibly unveiling here on a short week with travel? And then you mentioned us talking about this Monday a little bit, and I think we quickly referenced the Bears defense because this was a game that was, I believe, on the look-ahead line change that we did, yep. Right? The Bears have surprisingly been solid against the run all season. They're 7th in schedule-adjusted rush efficiency. You look since week 6, number 1 in EPA per rush allowed. The pass defense is by no means great, but it's getting much healthier. Jalen Johnson, Kyler Gordon, you have the veteran Eddie Jackson. They've all returned to the Bears secondary. First 5 weeks of the season when they were all injury ravaged back there in the secondary, Chicago was allowing 0.29 EPA per dropback, but from week 6 onwards with a healthy secondary, 0.07. It's now more of a middling pass defense in the league. Sprinkle in some pass rush help with Montez Sweat, because we know the Bears were bottom of the barrel in getting after the quarterback, probably helps the secondary tick up a little bit more as well. And then just quickly the other side of the ball, Chicago's probably going to have success on the ground. Carolina's dead last in defensive rush efficiency. You mentioned some of those key cogs out on that Carolina defense. Brian Burns, C.J. Henderson, starting safety, Xavier Woods is highly questionable. Still without J.C. Horn. So I start to think about this game and where your concern might be with Tyler Badgett. I'm not sure this is a spot where he's going to need to perform all that well for the Bears to be somewhat successful here.
No, I don't think he'll operate from a negative game state either. And we saw what could happen in his debut against the Raiders when the Bears were able to play within one score, not have to fight from behind. They could go through the playbook and be able to set some things up. I mean, you hate to say it because the Bears aren't getting a ton of wins, but this team has shown me a heck of a lot more as the defense has gotten healthier. And you wonder during this most recent stretch, if they were playing with Justin Fields, do they win that game against the Saints? They probably show significantly better against the Chargers as well, with a much maligned pass defense. Unfortunately for Chicago, the schedule gets extremely difficult in the next 4 weeks against two divisional rivals, the Lions twice, as they get through this spot with Carolina. But if Bryce Young isn't able to lean on a ground game here with Chuba Hubbard and company, I'm not sure there's a lot of weapons that really scare you in that passing game, knowing there is a level of familiarity as well with the Bears defense playing against Adam Thielen, who honed his craft as a member of the Minnesota Vikings. I guess the final thing I have on this game, where does the next move come? I mean, do we continue to trend towards a soft 3 like the market is suggesting? I mean, this is wild to me.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. And again, I think there's a theory there last week, right, where the Saints took massive money for, right? So we're selling the Bears. The Bears got sold on Sunday Night Football against a Chargers team as well. So you're looking at the Bears being sold in the market. It doesn't shock me that that's the case again this week when you're asking them to now win by margin.
No, it's a fair point.
Carolina, to me, though, right, is, if you kind of remove Tommy DeVito from the equation, is one of the worst team, potentially the worst team in the NFL with how this is trending. And it would appear as such, like that you have the advantage on both sides of the trench, as crazy as that sounds for Bears fans to hear, because it's not been the case for multiple years now. I was asked this morning if the Bears got to like minus 145 on the money line, is that going to be something that's of interest? Because it sounds like it is from other groups. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm as curious as anybody to see where this number continues to go and trend, because to your point, this is a Carolina team that I know wasn't 2 touchdowns worse than the Indianapolis Colts last week, but the defense not quite the same cogs, short week, young quarterback, and we've seen a significant sample size that those quarterbacks don't fare all that well, albeit even if the Bears have one in their own right, making his 4th start. From Thursday Night Football into Sunday in the wee hours of the morning in Frankfurt, Germany, it's the Indianapolis Colts and the New England Patriots traveling overseas. The Colts, a modest 1.5-point theoretically road favorite, as they're listed as such, but a 1.5-point favorite on a neutral. Total on the game, 43. This will mark the first Colts-Patriot matchup since week 2 of the 1998 season, where both teams enter with a sub-500 record. The Pats are 5 games under 500, and they've gone 362 straight games without being 5+ games under 500. It's now the worst 9-game start for the franchise since 2000, the first year of Bill Belichick's tenure with the Patriots. We look at the Colts from an injury standpoint. Julius Brents, Josh Downs, Zaire Franklin, Andrew Ogletree, all DNPs on Wednesday. Credit to the Colts, though, Payne. They're the only team in the NFL this year with 20+ points in every game, showing signs of that offensive DNA from Shane Steichen, even if Kenny Moore was their most valuable offensive player last week against Carolina. Meanwhile, Gardner Minshew had 0 turnovers in the game against the Panthers. The problem being is the Colts offense didn't do a whole hell of a lot. They punted on all of their second half possessions outside of the final one where they kneeled it out for the win. Offense wasn't able to extend drives. The one positive trend we are seeing for Indianapolis, Jonathan Taylor, as the Colts told us he would, starting to assert himself as the true number 1 back, had his largest snap share of the season at 74%, much to the chagrin of Zach Moss fantasy football owners who are hoping they could get a little bit more productivity out of him. When we look at New England, though, on the other side, this team appears to be dealing with plenty of internal turmoil, so much so that the Patriots told recently acquired J.C. Jackson, you know what, don't bother, just stay at home. We're going to travel overseas without you. Jack Jones also missed curfew last week in their game leading up to against the Washington Commanders. When we look at this football game, Payne, have we finally hit rock bottom for New England and the way they are being priced?
It's a great question. To your point about the turmoil internally, I think that doesn't come as a surprise, right? We kind of know that Bill Belichick wears on his guys, and you can live with that if you're successful in winning games and winning Super Bowls. But when you're not winning, there's going to be some backlash with that style of coaching. I do think the pricing is becoming a little bit interesting here. It's very possible we've reached the bottom for New England. And just looking right now, we have the Colts and Patriots dead even power rating wise. Perceptually, they're different, right? Especially after last week. So the Colts will open a small favorite here. But I kind of buried the lead a little early. But like, I look at the Colts, and they were outgained in totality and on a yards per play basis to the Panthers last week.
Oh, it was ugly.
Ugly. It was one of the worst performances I've seen in a win all season. I mean, Carolina to this point, we have power rated dead last in the NFL, if not for Tommy DeVito. And there's a few things that stand out to me here. I mean, it is what it is. He's not an NFL quarterback.
No, not at all.
Yeah. So when I look at the matchup, the first thing I notice is the Colts defense doesn't get much pressure. 8th lowest rate in the league. They also blitzed the lowest rate in the league to protect its secondary. And, people will, again, think back to last week, the 2 pick sixes by Kenny Moore, and equate that to great secondary play. If you exclude turnovers this year, the Colts are 25th in EPA per dropback allowed. You have your lead corner, Juju Brents, still battling a quad injury, has not practiced this week. I would say he's probably needs another week, but we got to monitor that. Mac Jones, despite all of his flaws, despite all of the hate, despite the very lackluster receiver group that we kind of just lump all of the issues onto Mac Jones, he's serviceable when he's kept clean. right? Like 21st out of 37 qualifying quarterbacks from a clean pocket and adjusted accuracy. This style in which the Colts align their secondary to cover up for some of those issues back there is by playing lots of cover 3. Mac Jones has been at his very best this season against that scheme. I also believe that he's going to have a complementary ground game. And I think the Patriots are starting to find some level of success on the ground. If you look, the offensive line getting a little bit healthier, starting to trend better. They're 9th in run block win rate. Ramondre Stevenson broke the explosive last week against the Commanders. That's generally not been the case for the Patriots offense, right? It's not an explosive ground game when you think about Stevenson and Zeke, but down to down, they've been pretty solid. They're above league average, trending well above in rushing success rate. And it's been the inverse for the Colts defense. Since week 6, the Colts are allowing over 42% of runs to grade successful. It's 27th in the NFL. We all know the big fellow in the middle there, Grover Stewart, is on the 6-game PED suspension. Zaire Franklin. Yeah. The Colts lead linebacker missed the Panthers game with a knee injury, didn't practice Wednesday. So as I look at this and you think about the power rating, you think about buying the Patriots at the floor because of that. Mac Jones potentially looking a little bit better here because he's going to be kept clean, you would think, a little bit more often. Not that Devontae Parker is some massive get back, but having at least an NFL caliber wide receiver out there to go with Demario Douglas and Juju, like it helps a little bit. You still have Hunter Henry, you still have Gesicki. Like there's some options there. You just need to use them properly. But I think what's becoming, the chatter here is, at minimum, right, the Patriots starting to become a little bit attractive in a teaser here, Todd.
You can't sell me on Juju being the missing link for this Patriots passing attack, where 3 out of his last 5 games, he's had exactly 1 catch, and once in his last 5 games, he's had more than 14 receiving yards. I mean, come on, Payne.
It was a great catch there, I believe. He had a 4th down snag, and then you're like, ooh. And then he drops the interception and the game. And people are like, Mac Jones shouldn't have thrown that. Yeah, I hate when Mac Jones delivers a perfect ball to an open receiver over the middle, and then he just drops it. So you would hope that Mac has a little bit more help this week, and certainly going up against a secondary and a pass rush that would at least lend you to believe that the Patriots, relative to expectation, can have a tiny bit of methodical success through the air.
Then you'd hope as well, to your point, I mean, knowing that they've been able to run the ball and show some efficiency, that they might give Ramondre Stevenson a bit more of an increased workload. I know game state-wise, he hasn't been able to get his normal touches, but there was no reason last week that he should have 10 or fewer carries for his 4th straight game after he ripped off the explosive against the Commanders defense that had just traded away 2 of their key cogs along that defensive line. But an interesting game for all sorts of different reasons. Sunday from Frankfurt, Germany, a far cry from the treat we got last weekend with 2 of the best teams in the AFC between the Chiefs and Dolphins. This game, Payne, may be the crown jewel, though, of the entire schedule in northern Florida, where the 49ers, fresh off a bye week, will travel all the way across the country to take on a surging Jacksonville Jaguars side. And you're looking at San Francisco, a full field goal favorite. Some prominent shops this morning trending to 3 minus 20. You're seeing the total become a true battle, 45 the consensus, but we've seen this thing kind of go back and forth. The 49ers became just the 2nd team in NFL history to lose 3 straight games after 15-plus game win streak, joining the 2008-2009 Indianapolis Colts. The 3 of the next 4 games for the 49ers will be on the road at the Jaguars, Eagles, and Seahawks. Meanwhile, this is a Jags team where there's been nothing fluke-like during their win streak. They've trailed for just 7 minutes and 10 seconds during that 5-game win streak, and all of those wins have come versus teams with a 500 or better record. The last 4 teams to accomplish such a feat had quarterbacks like Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, Drew Brees, and Tom Brady. So impressive company for Trevor Lawrence to be keeping. The 49ers, Payne, limped into the bye without Trent Williams, without Deebo Samuel. Trent didn't practice on Wednesday. I don't think it's a red flag just yet, although Kyle Shanahan said he was suffering from a little bit more than they let on, so you wonder if he will or won't be out there in full capacity. Christian McCaffrey needed the rest as well, dealing with that oblique injury. But this is a Jags team who steps into this contest, who's been very good against the run, vulnerable against the pass. Do we see a pass funnel type approach? Drop Brock Purdy back 50, 60 times and let him chuck it against this Jaguars secondary.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think this side of the ball is really fun in that, there's still levels of skepticism about the Jaguars' defensive improvement, right? And then,
by the way, I want to apologize for being a moron. So I know I threw you off.
It's okay.
I apologize for that. I'm going through it. I got excited to talk about this game. We normally go in rotation order, so we'll have to go back. So I apologize to you. Most importantly, our listeners would have known the difference if I didn't bring it up. So my apologies.
It's not a big deal. I think what's interesting is like you think about Jacksonville's defense coming into the season, and a lot of people thought it was like a bottom third defense of the league, and now you're like, oh my God, this is a really good unit. This is a top 5 unit right now. But then there's also the level of skepticism in, I think, Brock Purdy's ability to be a franchise quarterback after the last 3 games. It's amazing how quickly that flipped.
Yeah.
And so
funny how things change when you lose one of your primary offensive weapons and the linchpin of your offensive line.
Yeah, I mean, so like depending on which you believe to be true is likely, where you'll land on this game, and it seems to be like another one that just doesn't have a consensus feel to it. But I look through 9 weeks. We're talking about a Jacksonville defense top 5 in schedule adjusted efficiency, and it's possible the Jaguars are going to get some of the horses back in the secondary with Tyson Campbell and Andrew Sisko, and there were game time decisions against Pittsburgh before the bye, both worked out. I would think both trend towards playing, but certainly want to monitor that. And then offensively for San Francisco, yes, Debo's back, but the offensive line might not be as healthy as we would have hoped for out of the bye. Kyle Shanahan finally came out and admitted in his presser that Trent Williams' ankle injury is obviously more than a low sprain. I didn't know it was a low sprain to begin with. I thought it was a high one to begin with.
I'm right there. I'm right there with you. And the crazy part about that, depending on which 49ers source you read, some said that Shanahan said it was more than a low ankle sprain. Others said it was more than a high ankle sprain. So I don't know what the hell's going on there with their injury reporting.
And then it's, you see the quote following that, and Kyle Shanahan's like, it's an injury he's dealt with many times over the years, so there's some stuff going around down there. I said, okay. Some stuff going around down. And then you also have guard Aaron Banks, who's battling turf toe. Neither of those guys have practiced this week, so you got to monitor the 2 key cogs there along the 49ers offensive line. Jacksonville has done a fantastic job stopping the run, number 1 in NFL rushing success rate allowed. Just 30% of runs are grading successful, and if you can kind of slow Kyle Shanahan's run game down, it makes the offense far less potent. And I think that's easier to do, obviously, if you have 2 starting offensive linemen who are potentially still out. I'm a touch skeptical of the caliber of offense the Jaguars have played. It's far easier by our metrics than what's publicly out there. I'm also pretty neutral on Brock Purdy in that he's a great scheme fit. Probably far too hot initially in the season, but I don't believe the world's coming to an end either. I mean, if you look, and I think I said this after the Vikings game, the down-to-down efficiency has been just fine. It's the turnovers the last 2 games. Everything down to down for Brock Purdy is pretty much status quo. But I think this side comes down to another variance angle in the pressure. I mean, Brock Purdy's been under pressure more lately, and so the turnovers have come, right? 3 turnovers under pressure the last 2 games. Jacksonville doesn't get pressure at all. They're 25th in pressure rate. Likely will get more if they can stop the run and get the 49ers in more known passing situations, and then you unleash Josh Allen against a potentially Trent Williams-less 49ers, but it's just not something Jacksonville's done that you would peg and be like, hey, this is going to be, this is how Jacksonville wins this game. Sure, it's how they do it. They haven't done it. So it's kind of a leap of faith there to assume they will, even if the 49ers O-line's a little bit banged up, but you need pressure to impact Purdy. And I think initially, kind of going back to the very top of this show about all of professional bettors. Now, we don't all have these kumbaya circles where every single game we agree on. But I got to tell you, so far this year, there's been more battles in the market than I've ever seen before. But kind of bringing it back to that thought, initially, there was over money here in this game. And that was the initial move in the market. And then you start to dig into the matchup a little bit more, and the O-line injuries for the 49ers might not be solved. And so a respected group comes in and hits under 46.5 before it can even get to a key of 47, right? You would have thought like the initial move over, public's going to come in on this game. We might get the key of 47. No, like we're willing to take 46.5. And so it's a mindset that there's a full-blown battle on this game. It's why we're back down to 45. And part of that, I think, actually has to do with a little bit of the other side of the ball here, Todd.
And you mentioned the other side of the ball. Steve Wilkes will make a change. He'll go from the press box down to the sidelines. And when asked about it, Kyle Shanahan's comments are going to put him on the field this week, something we've talked about for a little bit. I think there's pluses to it and minuses to it, but we'll see what we like about this week. And when we look at the 49ers defense, I mean, going into the bye, they allowed an 82% completion percentage over their last 2 games, worse than a 2-game span in team history. Obviously, you get the opportunity for some self-scouting and to figure out exactly where things were going awry. As far as the 49ers and what they can do, they're one of the better defenses in the league when it comes to defending quarterbacks that release the football quickly. Trevor Lawrence has added that to his arsenal this year, getting it out at lightning pace. But also some of the struggles for the 49ers pass defense comes because teams can be much more balanced against them. They're allowing over 4 yards per rush this season, 18th in the league compared to 3.5 yards per rush allowed last season, which was a mark good enough for second in the NFL. So what do the 49ers do? They go out there and get Nick Bosa's college teammate in Chase Young to help fortify that pass rush and make them more tenacious. But if the Jaguars are able to find success running the football, it's going to open up the playbook for them. And we've seen Trevor Lawrence performing exceptionally well during this win streak. Travis Etienne turning into a special caliber running back, both as a runner and receiver. And don't look now, but maybe there's a level of optimism that this Jaguars receiving room can be the healthiest it's been since early in the season if Zay Jones is finally able to give it a go dealing with that knee injury.
Yeah, well, again, the theme of this game, there's a wide range of outcomes on this side of the ball. I mean, Doug Peterson is a great offensive mind, one we really respect, we think the world of, and now he's got 2 weeks to prepare. And the last time we saw the 49ers defense, it looked like the declining unit we projected them to be, but they've made changes, right? I mean, you mentioned the addition of Chase Young. There's going to be a little bit of an identity shift. You kind of saw it pre-buy, and that Steve Wilkes blitz numbers regressed. I don't know if that's the right plan here. You mentioned Steve Wilkes moving from the box down to the sideline. It's typically preference of coach. You can see the entire field versus being a little bit more involved in the game. This is very much a Kyle Shanahan decision. I talked pre-buy about how he was changing his schedule around to be in some defensive meetings. Kind of intimated that internally they were going to get themselves a pass rusher in a corner at the deadline. They got their pass rusher. The Bears ultimately decided not to trade Jalen Johnson, or that was going to be your cornerback for the 49ers.
Would have been a nice piece for the 49ers to add, that's for sure.
It was very close. Like I was hearing, a hair away from unfolding that well. And then you look at Jacksonville's offense, and honestly, the way they trended last year, you would have thought, hey, we're hitting the ground running. It just hasn't been that consistent. And Trevor Lawrence, to this point, has not taken the next step we all envisioned him taking. I mean, they beat Pittsburgh like a drum if he's not turning the ball over in certain situations. You're still seeing it, right? Like on 1st and 10, we can't be turning it over in the red zone because we're forcing a ball. Throw that thing through the back of the end zone. It's first down. You got 2 more downs. And he's still making some of those mistakes. There's just too much offensive talent, and I think improved ability and availability along the offensive line for Jacksonville to not be a more consistent offense. You mentioned Chase Young being added here. I think that's big. I think there's a lot of Washington fans that think he's been a little bit of a bust. I get it. He hasn't always been out there. He's been dealing with some injuries. Is he always dedicated to stopping the run? No. But I think he's found himself a bit this season. He's top 10 in pass rush win rate. He's top 10 in pressures. I think that helps Nick Bosa, who's been double teamed on 27% of pass rush snaps this season. You reunite those two, their former Ohio State buddies, and they're talking, right, our goal now is to see who can meet at the quarterback fastest. I just think you're going to see, an ability here to get to get a little bit more pressure than what we've seen early on in the season. And now all of a sudden, if you have that natural pressure, it allows Wilks to not blitz as much. Again, some of those rates have come down a little bit. I think what's interesting here, though, is I would almost let Wilks blitz a little bit more in this spot. Trevor Lawrence he has not been good this season when under pressure or blitzed. Specifically when blitzed, Lawrence is the second worst quarterback in EPA per dropback against the blitz. Only Russell Wilson has been more sensitive to the blitz this year. Lawrence under pressure has a below league average drop-off in EPA production when pressured. So that is the entire key on this side of the ball. The other layer of variance, and you kind of hit on it, is the run game. Like, what unit's going to take advantage? Because both the Jaguars run offense and the 49ers run defense have been middling this season. You would think maybe the offensive line improvement and health for Jacksonville is big, but then you're starting to add some pieces to the defensive line for San Francisco. You're coming off the bye week. Even the linebackers are a little bit healthier. In those situations, you're kind of looking for a team to play closer to its expectation, or there's a scheme matchup that would yield an advantage. But I think there's a lot of variance within that. And ultimately, like, this, to me, is one of the most interesting games of the day. I wish I had a little bit stronger of an opinion on it, but from what I've seen in the market, from what I've heard from some of the groups, like, you saw this open soft 3, so call it 2.8. There were some buy orders sent out on the 49ers on a cheap money line early. And then my understanding was if this got to flat 3.5, another group would be quite interested in Jacksonville. So, again, like, we have the battle on the total. I think a battle will break out on the side as well if you get to 3.5 flat. So it's just a little bit of a wonky game here, and it kind of lends itself to the breakdown we had in which there's some variance.
Can I ask one question more about process than anything else? When it comes to the 49ers, how do you handle their 3 most recent data points, knowing that they weren't at full speed for those contests? Given what we've seen from this team when they are 100% versus the way the market has kind of priced them here, do we feel like this is the same number we would have seen if this game had taken place in the wake of that 42-10 win for the 49ers over the Dallas Cowboys?
No. And I think that is very much, if you are backing the 49ers here, you're saying off those 3 losses, they've had the bye to regroup, get a touch healthier, although we know that's not necessarily the case along the offensive line just yet. But we're effectively buying the 49ers at what we'd believe to be their bottom tier price.
Okay.
And that was the thought process. Otherwise, you're looking at, something in the range what I would have felt of like 4.5 had they just continued to go on that winning streak. Or you probably see 4.5. Now, Jacksonville started slow, gained some momentum over in London, came back home, carried that over. Now, I know they weren't the most difficult opponents in the Colts and Kenny Pickett and the Steelers, but they're starting to trend more towards the team that we thought they could be off of last season's finish as well. So, I mean, that's effectively why there's some variance here. It's like if you believed Jacksonville was a team this season that was going to propel itself, hey, we took that step, we made the playoffs last year, now we're going to actually compete in the AFC. And you believe San Francisco does have those problems and Brock Purdy isn't that dude, that's why you're going to see a buy order at 3.5 flat here, I think.
It is always one of the biggest challenges to figure out if you can buy stock at the bottom or if the market isn't properly capturing current form and some of the injuries various teams are dealing with. You can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there for all things Bet the Board podcast. You can follow the podcast itself at Bet the Board Pod. And if you haven't already subscribed to the Bet the Board podcast newsletter, now is the perfect time to do so. You get it delivered to your inbox each and every Friday throughout the fall. It's a reminder of everything you may have missed on our fine website, along with some additional best bet content. And Payne, because your host is an idiot and can't follow simple directions, we'll go in reverse to the Cleveland Browns and Baltimore Ravens game, where it's the Ravens, a 6-point home favorite, welcoming in a familiar foe in the Cleveland Browns with a total of 38. This will be the first Browns-Ravens game in 15 years where these two teams are allowing it might help if I could read my own notes. The Browns-Ravens game, let's start over, is the first game in 15 years between teams allowing under 275 total yards per game happen this late into a season since the Browns played the Ravens back in 2008. The Browns and Ravens defenses combined to allow 3 points and 209 total yards last week. It's the first matchup with both teams coming off a game allowing under 155 total yards since 2011. When we look at Cleveland, the number one total defense in the league, Baltimore, the number one scoring defense in the league, the Ravens did win the first matchup 28-3 as part of the Dorian Thompson-Robinson experience that did not last long for Cleveland. When we look at the Ravens, they have been an under juggernaut when playing in their own building. 10 of their last 11 home games have all come in under the total. When we look at Cleveland, though, Payne, look, the defense, I think all of us have a pretty firm grasp in terms of some of that unit's strengths and weaknesses. But the biggest question is what we're going to get out of this team offensively. Deshaun Watson finished his first game since September 24th against the Cardinals last week. Goes 19-30, 219 yards, and a pair of touchdowns, including 22 yards rushing. It did include a big 3rd and 11 scramble that allowed them to extend a drive early, but it was the Arizona Cardinals. Suddenly, the Browns offensive line even more banged up than it's been at points this season. In steps a Ravens defense that has been able to pin their ears back and make life absolutely miserable for opposing offenses, especially when they play in their own building.
This is it's a good one. I'm looking forward to this actually even more than 49ers Jaguars, I think, because we broke this down a little bit on Monday, and I believe there was a thought process that, all of the Browns' offensive problems had suddenly been solved. I don't know what the path for points for Cleveland here is. And I think about the scheme first, and I think about Kevin Stefanski and how he's been successful offensively in this league. And the very reason he, has the Browns head coaching job is because the offenses that he was operating were very good, number one, but they were a little bit ahead of the times in that we're going to show you something and it's going to be completely different post-snap. And so he's operated from heavy sets a lot. He's used play action to pass a lot. It's made life easy on his quarterbacks. And then the running game, even though that thought in the year 2023 is a little outdated, his running game was very unique. It was very sophisticated. We thought of Stefanski's run game creativity kind of just behind Kyle Shanahan and basically all his coaching offspring, right? Which is, Mike McDaniel and those guys. But what's happened this season, it's very obvious, is we thought this would have to be the case in the offseason, but Stefanski basically created an offense to accommodate what Deshaun Watson likes the most and has previously been best at. So Stefanski's literally making his offense operate with the left hand in hopes that it helps Watson. The problem is Watson is stunk. And so you're kind of in this catch-22 of an offensive mind not running what he's best at to accommodate someone who's not playing their best. And it's led to some issues here offensively. Watson is QB 28 out of 33 qualifiers in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation. And I just don't think Stefanski has the ability to change back to his old ways, because right now, you mentioned it, both of the Browns starting tackles are out. Nick Chubb, obviously out for the year. So how do you fire up the ground game? And I just think the tackle combination of a rookie in DeJuan Jones and James Hudson with Jerome Ford toting the rock is probably not striking fear into anybody. And so you look at the Browns right now, bottom third of the league in rushing efficiency. The Ravens defense is also trending extremely well, and I think you calling the Browns defense number one in the league probably is a slap in the face to these gentlemen, because I think the Ravens are probably going to show why they have the number one defense in the league.
Total defense on a yards per game basis. I didn't say they were better than the Ravens.
It's what you're seeing is a unit that's getting substantially healthier, and they seem to hit the lotto on every single veteran pass rusher there is in this league the last half decade.
Funny how that works.
They just get that one or two extra seasons from that gas tank from those veterans. It's interesting. But since week 3, Baltimore number 1 in EPA per play allowed. Good against both the run and the pass. Mike McDonald has been absolutely fantastic. Everything the Ravens hoped for, right? With the ability to mesh game plans to opponent rather than Wink delivering the same pitch to every single batter. And you're seeing that last week. We're like, hey, the Ravens are a little bit split man and zone. Let's kind of have the game plan that gives Geno the most problems, and sure enough, that's what Mike McDonald did. What's interesting about this specific matchup is now that Stefanski is, accommodating Deshaun, the Browns use the 5th highest rate of 11 personnel, which is 3 wide receivers on the field at the same time. To date, the Ravens have been dominant defending 3 wide receiver passes and runs. Second best defense from a success rate standpoint, defending 11 personnel. I just don't see a ton of success for the Browns offense happening this weekend.
Well, if that's going to be the case, then the Browns defense is going to have to carry the lunch pail for this team to be competitive and get a big win on the road in hostile territory, a spot where the Ravens have been downright difficult to deal with on a variety of fronts. When we look at Baltimore last week in their 37-3 win against Seattle, their plus 362-yard differential was the second best in team history. They ran the football for nearly 300 yards, and they flourished out of 11 personnel with 16 design runs for 163 yards and 1 touchdown. When we look at this Baltimore Ravens season from an offensive standpoint, 73 explosive plays so far this season. And when you enter week 9, no offense had a higher dropback rate on first and second down than the Ravens. Go figure. Throwing on early downs and not known passing situations can have a massive upside when you're looking at overall efficiency. Lamar Jackson putting together one of his best seasons since he was league MVP back in 2019 from a completion percentage standpoint, and still showing big play potential with his legs. The Ravens running back room suddenly gets a little bit more complex with Keaton Mitchell's breakout performance. When you talk about 138 rushing yards in week 9, becoming the 4th most on fewer than 10 rushes in the Super Bowl era. The receiving room, they're a wealth of weapons as well. And maybe more importantly for the Ravens, their offensive line has shown a ton of continuity. Ronnie Stanley, arguably one of the weakest links on that group, just dealing with those lower body injuries. But they will no doubt be tested by a Cleveland Browns defense that's going to want to try and get after the quarterback and put their defensive backs on an island to try and make life difficult in the passing game.
Yeah, I think the one thing that we always talk about, because schedule is so important, you got to be able to manually adjust a lot of the schedule data. And I know we had a conversation, it was a Monday, potentially week 3, as we broke down, what had transpired the first couple weeks of the season. And we said the Browns defense would regress some after just unsustainable early numbers. And if you look around, the Browns are still number 1 in schedule-adjusted efficiency. And to the naked eye, the Browns have played a top 5 schedule of offenses. But they're getting credit for playing the Bengals. That was a week 1 game, right, with Burrow a shell of himself. They're getting credit for facing a 49ers offense. But they did it without Trent Williams, Deebo Samuel, CMC left early. And then you later find out Brock Purdy played through a concussion. They're getting credit for playing a Ravens offense in week 4 that's vastly different than it is now. And so the rest of that schedule has been the Steelers offense, the Titans, it's Gardner Minshew, it's Clayton Tune. You lose to a struggling Geno Smith and give up the game-winning drive. And so since week 6, the Browns are 5th in EPA per play lot. Still awesome, but we were talking historically good defense, the first month of the season. And again,
yep.
You're dipping to 5th against Clayton Tune and Geno and Gardner Minshew. The Ravens weren't humming the first time these teams played, and Baltimore really wasn't being pushed to score in that game, especially in the second half, because it was DTR at quarterback for the Browns. Lamar threw 19 times all game, least amount in the season. Lamar doesn't have splits as pronounced as Goff, but he's been substantially better at home too. And now you're looking at a Browns defense that structurally, in theory, is better against Lamar, right? They play gobs of man coverage. If you look at the first 3 quarters of games, Cleveland plays the highest rate of man at 55%. Lamar has, been much better against zone than man coverage, and I get that the Browns, again, lead the league in that, but even if you are super man heavy, Cleveland still plays 45% zone rate. And it's kind of the way that the league is trending. So Lamar's going to have some opportunities. And I think some of the man coverage issues almost feel like more of a byproduct of the receiver group. Like those guys are better designed to sit down in a window in space than be burners deep. I would like to see Todd Monken open up Zay Flowers. Like, I get that he's this great gadget guy, that he's got this great, run after the catch ability, but he's got great deep speed too. He can do more than just catch passes and be creative after the catch. If Monken Cleveland does that, I think we'll see Zay Flowers be far more effective against man coverage because his splits are dramatic. The Browns do like to attack defensively, so they've been great, down to down in terms of they've only allowed 32% of runs to grade successful. But you can kind of hit some chunk runs from time to time because of that aggressiveness. So, maybe you do see, a bursty guy like Keaton Mitchell a little bit more in the fold and say, hey, we can probably hit a home run or two because of that aggressiveness. And Keaton Mitchell's probably best positioned to do that. Lamar's legs are also more of a factor against man coverage teams as well. Didn't have huge rush numbers in the first meeting, but did have the 2 rushing touchdowns. Again, once you're in a game state of a 2 or 3 score lead and you're going up against DTR with your defense, there's probably not a need to use Lamar's legs as much. So there's certainly some advantages for Baltimore's offense relative to the perception of playing what's being deemed as the most efficient defense in the NFL here.
We saw this total open as high as 40.5 in some spots, see one-way traffic down to 38. It's interesting when you look at the side in total, not much movement really in either market, although you did see a modest tick up from Baltimore 5.5 to 38. You'd have to think if those two things come home to roost, exactly the point that you highlighted early, wondering what the Browns' path to success offensively is and how those things can manifest. So it should be an interesting game in terms of Kevin Stefanski being able to scheme up consistent offensive capabilities for his group against this Ravens defense, because listening to you talk about Baltimore on the offensive side, there may be a better path to success than a lot of people are led to believe.
This game is interesting because you mentioned the trend of Baltimore's home unders, but Lamar's been more efficient at home. So it depicts the defense is really kicking ass at M&T Bank Stadium.
Well, I think partly, though, too, when you look at some of those, look, the game against the Lions and the game against the Seahawks, the Ravens didn't have to do anything in the fourth quarter, and the only reason
they're not being pushed.
And the only reason the game came in under last week is because they elect not to score with Tyler Huntley in the game in the final 3 minutes when they had it goal to go or whatever it was.
As we're even ticking down here off the 38, right? There's 37.5 at Pinnacle. There's 37.5 at a couple of the sharp shops. And Baltimore wasn't pushed in the first game at all and still scored 28. And that's when their offense wasn't humming. And, Cleveland in chase mode with DTR just didn't have enough punch. I do think Deshaun Watson, while he's not been very good, the legs, the aggressiveness, if they're playing catch-up, I think, Cleveland's a little bit more successful in that area. Do they just realize that they're not going to be able to run the ball here and just come out pass happy? You have the issues with the tackles. You have a guy who's probably not overly comfortable taking hits right now, so he may turn the ball over if the turnovers come in his own end versus the green zone the other way, create some short fields. At 37.5, I couldn't even think about going under.
No, not with the Ravens offense, knowing that it's a group trending up right now. That is for damn sure. And the Ravens, quite frankly, with a win on Sunday, if they're able to pull off the victory and then following it up on a short week with a win against the Bengals, could more or less secure the AFC North, much to the chagrin of everyone else in that division. But a chance to really do some damage to their division mates with back-to-back divisional home games with a very short turnaround. Unfortunately, Payne, we are contractually obligated to talk about Sunday Night Football, and we will go there now. Right here in Las Vegas, a game that doesn't get flexed because there wasn't really anything else on the NFL schedule worth flexing into the primetime time slot. So you'll see the Raiders in their second game under Antonio Pierce at a pick'em as they'll welcome in Gang Green. Total on this game, 36.5, but we have seen a touch of over money here on Thursday morning. Credit to Antonio Pierce. Fifth largest win by an interim rookie head coach in NFL history with a plus 24 scoring margin last week against the Giants. And as far as the Raiders franchise was concerned, it was their largest win and fewest points allowed in a game going all the way back to 2020. The Jets, we talked about them being much maligned on Monday, and their offense did not disappoint with that pathetic effort against the Chargers. Again, NFL low, 46 offensive plays they've run so far this season with the lead. Just to illustrate how bad the Jets have been on offense, even the Giants and Pittsburgh Steelers are logging first downs and touchdowns at a higher rate than the Jets. Giants recording a league low 11.8 points per game, and the Steelers are scoring a modest 16.5 per contest. When we look at this football game, Aiden O'Connell should struggle mightily against this Jets pass defense, but we know the Jets have also been vulnerable to the run, and Antonio Pierce has said he has 2 goals with this Raiders. I'm paraphrasing here, that he wants to restore a culture where the players can have fun. He wants to run the football, and he wants to be able to stop the run. Josh Jacobs may get it 50 times if Antonio Pierce has his wishes, but when you look to try and figure out an angle worth exploiting in this game, is it Zach Wilson against the Raiders defense, or is it a rookie quarterback against one of the league's best secondaries, headlined by Sauce Gardner?
So the first thing I'm going to ask you, because it's probably more interesting than talking about this game, but we'll get to that in a minute. You said there's no games that could have been flexed into this spot. Is that because of TV contracts?
Believe so.
Okay, because I was going to ask you that, because it's NBC, right? You could have got Browns, Ravens. You could have had 49ers, Jaguars. My guess is the league doesn't have carte blanche, even though it's partners with all of the TV networks.
I think it's a more complex bidding process than that, and I have to imagine that, the Giants-Cowboys game, Fox wasn't giving that up in the afternoon time slot with 2 major markets, even if the Giants stink. But there had to be other complications that came from not getting the Browns, Ravens, and the 49ers, Jaguars. My feeling is the Ravens, Browns was never an option because the Ravens play on a short week on Thursday.
That makes sense. I'm hoping we get a group text from Royce, who's on top of stuff like this, and he can confirm or deny.
They're not heavily involved in the NFL, so
they're not, but he knows how these deals are.
Hopefully, we get some
struck.
perspective from our industry and stuff.
Yeah, this season in general, right, made a lot of great bets in college and pro. But a lot of those bets have managed to defy the odds. This one is not over by any stretch, but it shouldn't be behind the 8 ball where it is either. What if I told you that you could go under 7.5 wins on an NFL team? It would close 6.2 wins. And after 8 weeks, the team and organization is such a clusterfuck. It fires its coach 20 months into a 6-year deal. It fires its GM. The quarterback it spent $73 million on was benched 6 games into this deal. And now the interim head coach is a guy largely responsible for an NCAA investigation and ban at his last stop in Arizona State. The head coach has never been even a coordinator at the NFL level. And as we know, right, like even with how the NFL is trending, offense matters more than defense. And this new head coach promotes a first-time quarterback coach to be his offensive coordinator and play caller, and he's never done either before. And here's the kicker. His disciple is Adam Gase. He learned offense from Adam Gase.
Your guy.
The quarterback that this first-time play caller is now having run his offense was in a QB competition at one point while at a middling, at best, Big Ten program. This QB was overdrafted by the guy who in that Raiders locker room now shits on. It doesn't sound like a bet in a million years I would ever think could lose. Welcome to the 2023 NFL season Raiders win total.
Hey, thankfully the schedule doesn't get that much easier after this week.
It's already gotten easier because they play fucking Tommy DeVito last week and they don't get Aaron Rodgers this week, right? So when you're kind of in your head going through these win totals, you don't project for that. Now, I think what's interesting about this game, and it's more narrative based to me than numbers based, right? You just look at power ratings. Like, should the Jets be -1, 1.5? Should the Raiders be -1? Like, okay, we're going through the zero. It's not anything substantial. I don't think there's a question the Raiders locker room is in a better place. Antonio Pierce is a player's coach. The attitude and motivation can take you to a certain point in football and life. I'm not trying to be a philosopher here, but like, you're hearing these things from Antonio Pierce. You're seeing the locker room be a little bit more joyful. And then you start to read the quotes and you start to think about the new Raiders philosophy. And it's like, we're going to be a team tough, very tough team, mentally, physically, right? You're going to watch us play and say, damn, that's how football is supposed to be played, right? We're going to run the ball. We're going to stop the run. We're going to have some fun. I mean, take me back to the days of Bronco Nagurski. Like, I'm ready to run through a brick wall. Like if this was the outlook from the onset of the season where you had a linebacker coach becoming a first-time head coach, talking about running and stopping the run, and he hired a guy to be his OC and play caller that learned from Adam Gase, and there's a middling round rookie QB who's not mobile, you just be asking how quickly can we fade this team? the market's saying otherwise early this week. Everyone's buying the cigar-smoking victory lap after beating Tommy DeVito, right? A kid that couldn't win the starting job at Syracuse, and then mustering 3.7 yards a carry against a defense, and that's 28th in schedule-adjusted run stopping, and suddenly like they're back, and I get it. Like some sharp guys played the Raiders in advantage teasers, right? Get them to +8, +7.5 with a total of 36.5, 37. That's a good leg. What I didn't really understand was the move on the Raiders straight +1 that came in yesterday. And my vibe is that this line continues to leak towards the Raiders. It's Sunday Night Football. Everyone just saw the Raiders winning a blowout. They're smoking cigars. Everything, is right in the world. And, with the new look Raiders and, the Jets on Monday Night Football get blown out on the scoreboard. It's a short week. There's travel. I just get the feeling, Todd, at some point closer to kick, we're going to see some respected bettors take a stance in the Jets, understanding that, they have the best unit on the field with a fringe top 5 defense that you can buy on a team that lost by 3 scores, even though it outgained its opponent, that you can fade the idea of beating Tommy DeVito means you're back. And at some point, I think that realization is going to be attractive to at least a faction of pro bettors. The idea that Zach Wilson, is completely in a mismatch versus the other team's starting quarterback is not a thing, right? Like when you're going up against, Josh Allen or Justin Herbert or Patrick Mahomes, like that's a tough hill to climb for Zach Wilson. Maybe Aiden O'Connell is, but I just on the surface it doesn't seem like that. So I'm struggling with this game.
You mentioned the 21-point loss and the Jets coming up on the wrong side of that 27-6 decision on Monday. Gave up just 191 yards in that game. It was actually the third fewest by any team in a 3-touchdown plus point loss going all the way back to 2000. So it does have some historical significance in how improbable it actually was. The one question I have for you that I want to ask when we look at some of the X's and O's, Jets offensive line against this Raiders defensive front. Can the Jets do things to protect Zach Wilson?
It's going to suck. Max Crosby against,
That's the one question I have for you in that game.
That's probably the one advantage the Raiders have in this spot. It's basically the question every single Jets game, we saw it again on Monday night where Joey Bosa was a game wrecker. The Chargers go out and they have the whatever it is 80+ yard punt return, but at that point it felt like the Jets were kind of regathering themselves. They got the ball at midfield, and then all of a sudden, Joey Bosa happens against, Billy Turner, who we told you is, not very good.
Now dealing with a broken hand.
Yeah. So, he creates the fumble and falls on it, and it's a short field for the Chargers, and they go down and score a touchdown. So that's the concern. Yeah, it's Max Crosby continuing to be a disruptor. That guy is just phenomenal, and it feels like he's started to round out his game completely. He's now one of the vocal leaders in the locker room. And yeah, that is certainly a concern. I think every single week the Jets line up and play football on offense, that offensive line's a concern. You would just think, we're now 10 weeks into the season. That's certainly being more than factored into the price.
No, I would agree there. There's a reason that the Jets are an underdog, at least right now, or pick them against this Raiders team. And a lot of it has to do with the building blocks up front. So we'll see if the Jets can play with a little bit of pride on a short week traveling across the country.
Ravens
against their
taking some money as we speak, out to 6.5. Yeah,
starting to drift through the secondary
at the spots that are meaningful too.
Yes, I was going to say those spots meaningful first and foremost, taking the money with all of it. You can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there for all things Bet the Board. You can follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. All right, my friend, best bet portion of the program. I think we made chicken salad out of chicken shit with some of the games that the NFL schedule makers have blessed us with this fine weekend. I'm sure there's plenty of Lions and Chargers fans hoping that we would get them into the mix, but alas, we talked enough Chargers football on Monday night. They weren't getting back into the fold twice.
Little battle there too.
In 6 days. Oh yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
There's your talk. There's your talk on Lions Chargers. Early Lions money. As soon as it got to flat 3, you're starting to see a little bit of a difference of opinion there. So welcome again to the 2023 NFL season.
The good old
sharp guys are not agreeing.
The good old quantifying home field advantage at SoFi Stadium every time the Chargers play in their home jerseys. But all right, best bet portion of the program, my friend. What do we got?
Yeah, you and I talked a little bit and said, get this thing turned around. I shot you a note and said, hey, give me your favorite three. Let me come through them. This was also one of my favorite three. So we end up going back to the roots, a first half under. It will be rotation number 1250, Saints Vikings, first half under 20.5. Not going to split the atom here. You basically have two top 10 defenses as it stands right now. You have two offenses that have played a bottom third of the league's schedule of opponents, so maybe a little bit of a shift to the system, so to speak. Where the Saints have been a little bit vulnerable on defense is against the run. I understand that the Vikings have been pass happy, but you go back to a lot of the quotes from the offensive coordinator, from Kevin Stefanski. It's like, hey, we want to establish the run this season. We want to be able to, hey, if teams are coming out in soft coverage, we want to be able to run the ball at them. They haven't been overly efficient doing it. But with Josh Dobbs, you would hope at this point, 3 and 4 yard runs are fantastic for an under. And I think the Vikings are at least going to try that path early on. I also think that for all the coaching woes going on in New Orleans right now, most of them are on the offensive side of the ball. I still think Dennis Allen's a very good defensive mind. Josh Dobbs got figured out before fucking whatever Arthur Smith and that Atlanta Falcons staff was doing last week.
Good old Artie. Good old Artie.
There's a reason. Like, think about the Josh Dobbs experience, right? Came out of the box hot. A lot of people are like, yeah, this is expected. He's an aerospace engineer. He was one 8 years ago too when he graduated from college.
Don't take shots at academics.
No. I'm not. But my point is, like, we were backing Josh Dobbs early because he's so smart, as if we just realized he's just smart. He was just as smart in the playoff game. He was just as smart 3 years ago when he wasn't a starting quarterback in the NFL. Right? He was just as smart then. The problem was, he made some errors, and we kind of got figured out that, hey, he typically only rolls right and he throws right a bunch. All the teams figured that out, to the point where what? The offensive coordinator that was in Arizona worked with Dobbs in Cleveland. That was like his hand-picked guy, and he was like, hey, we're out. We're done. We're going to move on to Clayton Tune. So my point here is, like, I think Dennis Allen, who's a little bit of a sophisticated defensive mind, is going to at least have Josh Dobbs figured out. He's going to go back to the film that landed Josh Dobbs, kind of in the crosshairs of a team that, knew him so well and thought very little of him that they moved him. So I think that's a positive here. The New Orleans Saints, like, they're just not humming on offense. I understand the Bears defense a little bit improved unit, as we mentioned at the top of the show, but, like, at home, indoors, like, I would have thought that would have been a little bit of a better performance offensively with all the steam they caught. It just wasn't. They struggled to put that game away. Again, they scored 24 points last week, with being the benefactor of 5 Bears turnovers. So I think, if Josh Dobbs limits the turnovers and acts, like an aerospace engineer with the ball, we should be fine here. So let's go under 20.5 in the first half.
I see what you did there. You talked about splitting the atom, and you brought it all the way back to an aerospace engineer. So I'm glad we're covering the full scope of the various sciences that are out there to try and land us on a winner this week at US Bank Stadium. All right, that's enough damage that we have done for a Thursday program. We'll be back with you on Monday for a little Broncos and Bills, if the schedule I'm reading is correct. Yep, it appears that'll be the game, and we will go from there. So anything else you'd like to add before we close up shop? Yet another week down the drain in this lovely journey we call the football season.
No, I think that's it. Let's go back to our roots. Let's get a little first half winner here, under 20.5. 20 key number. So, I don't know where this is going. I'm not going to pretend to know. Like, again, these numbers are quite low, relatively speaking. But if it's Sunday morning and you're staring at 19.5, probably not worth pummeling the market at that price. So 20.5 is the number here. Let's try to get to that early.
You got it. Let's do it. All right. Best of luck to all of you, our loyal Bet the Board listeners, with all of your NFL Week 10 investments, and with a first half under ticket from the Twin Cities in hand come Sunday afternoon. We'll see you at the window.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X, Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.